Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Multifamily with our queen in multifamily, Veena Jetti. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you for having me.
And today we're going to talk about accredited investor. We have been hearing that word over and over about like any investment that you want to do. There's always an accredited investor that can have certain benefits and things like that. So first of all, what is an accredited investor?
Yes. Okay. This is a really good question. And before we talk about what it is, let's talk about why we care, right?
Okay, let's see.
So based on securities rules, and I'm not a securities attorney or an attorney of any kind, really. But we care about following securities rules. So your securities attorney will be able to explain this to you and confirm everything I'm saying. But why it matters is because when we are investing in real estate and we're raising capital, we are raising a security that's exempt from registration because it falls under a certain regulation. So for our deals, we operate under Regulation D, which is meant for real estate investments, and it's Rule 506C, like Charlie C. And there's also 506B, there's Regulation Crowd Fund, Reg A. There's a lot of different ways that you can be exempt from registering. So this is why you need your attorney. This should be your first call when you're raising capital. But on a 506C raise that we do, we can only have accredited investors in our deals. More importantly, a self-attested self-attested accreditation status is not enough. The SEC is very clear that we can't just ask like, hey, Susie Smith, are you accredited? They say yes. And we say, okay, great. We'll take your word for it. We have to take reasonable steps to verify that this is true. So what we do is we ask for either a CPA, a financial advisor, your attorney, or somebody else that's knowledgeable about your financial position to attest to your accreditation status. So what is an accredited investor? An accredited investor, there's a few different ways you can meet that threshold. The two most common ways you're going to meet it is one, you have an income of over $200,000 or more for the last 2 years with a reasonable expectation of maintaining that same level of income.
Gotcha.
And if you're married, that threshold is $300,000 for the last 2 years with a reasonable expectation of maintaining it. And that's the household income. And then the other way that most investors will meet it, if they can't meet it through income alone, they usually will meet it through net worth. So that is a net worth of $1 million or more, excluding your primary home, which means like all of you California investors cannot include the equity in your home as part of your net worth requirement.
Gotcha. And what are some of the requirements that you would need to submit in order to become an accredited investor?
Yeah. So when we have a third party verify, usually it's going to be like your CPA or your accountant or your attorney or somebody who's really intimately familiar with your financial position. So they already know how much you're making in a year. They already know what your assets are. They already know your net worth. And they can say, yes, this is my license number. And I can certify that Veena Jetti is accredited under the SEC guideline, 501 guidelines or whatever that is. And so they'll write a letter saying that. There are websites you can go to where you can submit your documentation, and those websites will generate a letter of accreditation for you so that sponsors like me can accept that.
So when it comes to all of these process of becoming an accredited investor, what are some of the ways that you have seen in the case of the equity, for example? As you were mentioning, Californians, you can't use your equity.
Yes.
What are some other ways that people can have that $1 million, for example?
Yeah. So what you're asking is how can you get to $1 million in net worth?
Because it sounds like quite a bit. And but also if you look at it on this market, I know that so many people have equity sitting in their homes, but if you take that out of the equation, how do you do it? Yeah.
So one way you could do it is you could leverage the liquidity available in or the equity available in your primary home, right? So if you took a HELOC or something like that, you could invest it and then potentially add to your net worth there. I'm by no means saying that you should do this in order to get to accreditation status. Don't let the accreditation tail wag the business dog, right? It's usually said for like tax tail, but this is applicable in this scenario. So I definitely would not do this just to get accreditation status, but if it makes sense, then that's one way you could increase your net worth. The other thing I will say too is that you don't necessarily have to do anything to become accredited. You either are or you aren't accredited. Another way that you can meet accreditation without either of those two, and this is a recent change to the SEC guidelines, is you can have certain licenses. And There's a list of licenses. I think it's like your Series 7, maybe the 65. I think the 66. Don't quote me on that. But there's a few different licenses you can study for. Take that exam, and it makes you a knowledgeable investor. So you can actually meet the guidelines for accreditation through those licenses as well, which doesn't require the net worth or income.
And how do you go about calculating your net worth? Because I know that some people have different like investments that they currently have, and they don't even know that they have them, such as like an IRA or 401k. How do you go about that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because everybody should know what their net worth is, and you should be tracking your net worth, because how can you see if it's growing or not, right? So we use what's called like a personal financial statement. And basically it's like a personal balance sheet, and it tells me all of our assets, and then it tells me all of our liabilities. So your net worth is simply all of your assets minus all of your liabilities. If you don't have a PFS or personal financial statement, they're very accessible. They're very easy to download. You can get plenty of templates to do this. And what you do is you're going to enter everything that you have that's an asset. So your home, you're going to enter stocks, bond portfolio, rental properties. Maybe you've loaned somebody some money and they owe you money. So like a line of credit. And then you're going to put all your liabilities in, right? So like your mortgage, your car payment, student loans, your utilities, your credit card payment, et cetera. And so your net worth is the difference between your assets minus your liabilities. So if you have $1 million in assets and $2 million in liabilities, you have a negative net worth. Yes, you're in the red. But if you are, let's say you have $2 million in assets and $1 million in liabilities, then you have $1 million net worth.
Gotcha. And what are some of so for example, you mentioned that in order to comply with all of these regulations, you have to be an accredited investor. Can you still invest without being accredited?
Yeah, so it depends on what the exemption being relied on is. So there is another exemption called Reg D 506B, like boy. And the 506B allows you to have, as a sponsor, it allows you to have up to 35 unaccredited but sophisticated investors. And this is important because it allows investors that maybe don't have accreditation status yet to get into these deals. But here's the caveat. On a 506B, you cannot generally solicit. So I can't go into a crowd of people that I just met and say, hey guys, I have this new deal, come invest with me, right? Like that is not allowed. I have to have a pre-existing substantive relationship with the investor. So let's say I have the person that goes to church with me, right? Or the other PTA mom that I see every week. Let's say one of them is interested in investing, and maybe they have a degree in finance and they have an investment advisor or financial advisor that they're going to run all this by, and they decide they want to invest, but they don't meet any of the investment requirements. Well, in a 506B, that's no problem because they are sophisticated, but not necessarily accredited. So I can have up to 35 investors like that in my deal.
Gotcha. So, and what are some of the other ways that people can become sophisticated? Because you mentioned like a finance degree, but what if they don't have a finance degree?
Yeah, so there is not a very clear rule on how someone is sophisticated. So it's like a reasonable assumption. So a lot of ways that you can do that is if you have a financial advisor who's also signing off on it, they're sophisticated, they can give you proper advice. These rules are really designed to protect people from making bad investments that they can't withstand in the risk tolerance of what their investments are. So you have to already know them well enough ahead of time to really know if they're sophisticated or not. Maybe they're an astute real estate investor. They've invested in hundreds of deals before and they're just not accredited. Or maybe they have worked in securities and they understand how securities work, but they're not accredited. Or maybe they just graduated from school and so they're building their accreditation status, but they work at a fund of fund or something like that. Those are all ways that they can be considered sophisticated, but this is actually a very nuanced topic. So it's something that you definitely should be running by your securities attorney. They'll want you to document substantive relationship in a specific way. And you want to make sure you're really not generally soliciting because you may not be able to rely on the 506B exemption if you do.
Right. You need to make sure that you're compliant to all of those regulations.
Yes.
Now, let's say that you are an accredited investor. Is it kind of like a family benefit that you can also share with your relatives if they wanted to invest into deals?
No, unfortunately, no. If you are married and you are at the $300,000 or more, then you both are considered accredited. But if I wanted to share it with like my daughters, I can't do that. There are other ways to meet the accreditation status. So one, for example, is like if you are an irrevocable trust or with a $5 million of invested assets, you can be considered accredited. But again, there's very nuanced rules around it. So you want to make sure you are really checking with your securities attorney. And if you're in doubt, especially of whether you're accredited, definitely reach out to the attorneys so that they can give you their blessing.
And can you remind us again, what's the specific type of attorney that we should be reaching out?
Yeah. So if you're looking to see if you're accredited or not, and you're investing with a sponsor like myself, you can usually send your circumstance or your situation and we'll have our securities attorney look at it. If you're a sponsor and you're not sure if an investor is accredited or not, it's always best to get third-party verification, but also, ask more questions, get more information and data, because what you don't want to do is have someone who is unaccredited be in a deal where you think they're accredited and have it ruin your exemption.
That's right. Thank you so much, Veena. And there you have it, people. There's always an attorney that can help you find if somebody's accredited and willing to be in your deals so you can have the best deal ever. Yes. We're going to see you on the next episode.